With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. I'm Andrew Donaldson. This is going to be fun. We're going to go down to Georgia, talk a little Georgia politics, a little Georgia policy, a little Georgia education, and this is a Georgia feller. He didn't start that way, though. He's actually, you scratch him hard enough, there's a little West Virginia still underneath that. Our friend Jason Downey, he's an attorney. He's also the sitting chairman, Board of Education for the state of Georgia. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Good talk to you. You're like me. The accent's gotten a little softer, but it'll come out. We'll get to hills and hollers and yonders here in a minute. It'll start sneaking out, won't it?
That's right.
Just for clarification purposes, you are a political appointee by Governor Brian Kemp. So we'll lay that out on the table, but your opinion are yours and yours alone. But let's make sure everybody knows that. Let's just start right there because we had some news this week. We had, of course, the Georgia governor debate for the primary for the Republican Party. There's just no way to talk about Perdue without going back to what happened in Georgia in the Senate runoffs. This is where this whole story changes because we had January 6th and the Georgia runoffs. That's kind of the path break on the narrative for political path that we're on right now. You were there. Go back to that moment because the national narrative for the Georgia runoffs was Trump showed up and it all went sideways. Is that how it felt for you when those Georgia runoffs happened and both Senate seats flipped blue?
Yeah, I think so. You had the two runoffs, and the thing about David Perdue, and again, full disclosure, I am a Brian Kemp appointee. I'm a friend of the governor. I support the governor. You can go to my Twitter account and see some of the things I said after the debate the other day that the governor had with David Perdue. I have never been a David Perdue fan. I didn't support David Perdue in the primary when he ran in 2014 against Jack Kingston. I supported Jack Kingston at the time. So I have never been a fan of David Perdue. But David Perdue has always been a lazy campaigner. And so one of the issues that happened in that race against Senator Jon Ossoff was that David Perdue didn't show up to the debate. And so Jon Ossoff had an hour that he could just point at an empty podium and say, where is my opponent? He's not here. And that's sort of been the narrative throughout David Perdue's political career. He's always been a lazy campaigner. And now he's got Trump doing his evil work for him, so to speak. Trump is really targeting Governor Kemp because he thinks, of course, we know that Donald Trump, if you betray him, that's just the worst thing you can do. And that's what's happening now with this race. But yeah, it all goes back to Trump's involvement way back when, January 5th and 6th, when that happened, and it's been downhill ever since.
Now, and to be fair here, Kelly Loeffler was the other candidate in that race. I'm trying to think of a way to describe it. She may be the least charismatic stump speech candidate I've ever seen in my life. And I was represented by Nick Rahal for many, many years. So that's saying something. That's a West Virginia reference. Y'all go look it up on your own time. She was a terrible candidate. I mean, just like you could not put her, if you were doing a TV show, you couldn't put her on TV. She's that bad with a microphone. Even with that all said, though, Jon Ossoff and Raphael Warnock both won their Senate races because it was a special election. Raphael Warnock is up. One thing the national narrative skipped over because they were so busy talking about Trump. Talk about Senator Warnock for just a second, though, because that race, am I in the minority with some of our friends here? I think he's going to be a really tough out because that race got personal. It got really, really ugly, and it's in recent memory. I don't think people have forgotten. Talk about that for a minute because the national narrative kind of skipped over that a little bit, but that race got really, really nasty in the state of Georgia, didn't it?
It really did. The thing about Kelly is, and I've known Kelly for a little while, I supported Kelly as well, but when you have to understand when Senator Johnny Isakson retired, it gave Governor Brian Kemp the opportunity to appoint someone. And this is where the falling out began. And there's actually a book about this that a friend of mine, Greg Bluestein from the AJC, wrote. And it's about this whole timeline of what happened in Georgia politics. And it really began with Governor Brian Kemp beating Stacey Abrams in 2018 and how everything came from that and was born out of that. So when Governor Brian Kemp appointed Kelly Loeffler as senator to replace Johnny Isakson, Donald Trump was very mad. He was president at the time, and he really wanted Representative Doug Collins to be that person. That was his hand-picked person. And when that didn't happen, that was when the betrayal began in Donald Trump's eyes. And Doug Collins decided to jump in and run anyway. We had what was called a jungle primary, where everybody's up at one time. Doug forced Kelly Loeffler to move further right. And the whole reason that the governor appointed her was thinking that she could appeal to what we call the Cobb County soccer moms in a lot of ways. Some people call them that. I just call them, the Cobb County moderate voters, if you will. That's sort of a microcosm of where we are in the state of Georgia. Cobb County is a county right outside of Atlanta. And I think he hoped that Kelly would be able to appeal to those voters. But when Doug Collins jumped into the race, it forced Kelly to move further right. She had some ill-fated commercials which compared her to Genghis Khan. It was not the best campaign in the world. But then we got down to, through the jungle primary, it was Raphael Warnock and Reverend Warnock and Kelly Loeffler. And then it got really nasty right there at the end. And I will say this, that Reverend Warnock, I have met him. He is a very dynamic individual, very charismatic. It's going to be interesting what happens now. Herschel Walker is probably going to end up being the Republican nominee running against him in that race. It may get nasty again. And when I say nasty against Herschel, and then nasty against Senator Warnock.
Yeah, I don't see this one going good either which way. How much of that nasty, though, is going to be the former president injecting himself? Because he's made no secret Georgia is his focus. He's spent a lot of time there. I've kind of, and some others, we've been kind of calling it the vendetta ride. This is kind of where him and his folks were planning on getting their revenge. That's not going well with David Perdue. Herschel Walker looks like he's in a little bit better situation. He's actually leading in some polls, so we'll see how that shakes out. Is that how it feels there on the ground in Georgia? That this is the national narrative. I'm just looking at it from the guy at the computer. You're physically there. How's it playing? Do people really want Donald Trump involved? Do they want his name and the cachet of that? Or do they want to be left alone to play it out? Or is it somewhere in the middle of that spectrum?
Well, it's somewhere in the middle. You do have some people that are diehard Trump fans here. And those are the people that will vote for David Perdue. But when he jumped into the race, and when the rumors came about that he was going to jump into the race, you really thought, oh, okay, both may poll in the 40s, both Governor Brian Kemp and Mr. Perdue. That has changed completely. Internal polling, from what I've seen, shows that Brian Kemp will get reelected in the primary by maybe over 60%, at least in the high 50s. And one might say, well, that's pretty weak for an incumbent, but you can throw out past politics and the way things have gone in the past because of this juggernaut, if you will, that we call Trump. I think what he's going to do is shift his focus immediately and say, well, David Perdue wasn't the best candidate anyway, which is what he always does. He always tries to justify or caveat everything when he loses. Well, I really didn't campaign that hard for him. Never mind that he is putting $500,000 of his own money into David Perdue's campaign for advertisement right now. What you're going to do is you're going to see him shift and go all in with Herschel Walker, and then also his handpicked candidates for lieutenant governor, which are Burt Jones, and then Jody Hice for Secretary of State. And I think you're going to see him focus on those three races, and he'll stay out of the governor's race. He threatens that he's going to give Stacey Abrams money and support her. He's not going to do that. So he'll stay out of the governor's race once David Perdue is sent back to Sea Island, which is where he lives and where he should have stayed, to be quite honest. Yeah, and to be fair, he doesn't have to send her money because he can get people to sit out, which is the same thing. Real quick, just because you just mentioned it, the Hice Raffensperger race, Raffensperger was supposed to be DOA. That wasn't even supposed to be a race. That was supposed to be a layup. Now we got is Raffensperger got a chance here? Is he going to survive this? Maybe it looks weird on paper, and then you're like, nah, that can't be right. But you're there again. You're on the ground. You tell us. Is people surprised? Is the polling just off? What's going on here? Because this doesn't make any sense. It depends on where you are. And I will say this: when you look at the governor's race, you get polling, and as you get closer to election day, you get more and more accurate polling. Lieutenant governor, it's a little bit more iffy, and then it drops off from there. So we've got a lot of local races. State representatives are running for re-election. Open seats, state senators are running. And then we've got situations like the Secretary of State. We've got, races for insurance commissioner. We have no idea what the polling looks like. And all you can rely on is internal polling. And of course, a campaign is going to say whatever the internal polling is that's favorable to them. I will say that it looks like really that there will probably be a runoff. And it looks like it's going to be Raffensperger and Hice in a runoff. And what that means, I don't know. I know that if that happens, Trump will come in and campaign very hard for Jody to win that. But yeah, I think a few months ago, you thought maybe if Raffensperger got 18 or 20% of the vote, he'd be lucky. He's polling, it looks like, a lot higher than that, maybe in the 30s.
For people that are talking to our buddy Jason Downey down in Georgia, he's also a lawyer on the side. That's why he talks so articulate and such. For the folks that aren't used to these runoffs, because not every state has runoffs, how big a deal is it for Governor Kemp to not get embroiled in a runoff, even if he was going to win it handily? Boy, those couple of percentage points and not having to do a runoff, how big a deal is that for him? Because we already know, because we've seen the first version of this movie, let's assume it's going to be him and Stacey Abrams. That's going to be a neck and neck, very hard campaign and fight. How big a deal is it for him to get through this preliminary and not have to do the runoff? It's
a huge deal. The way that Governor Kemp became governor is he finished second in the primary when he ran in 2018 to Casey Cagle, who was the lieutenant governor at the time. And Casey Cagle had in the 40s. I mean, it was like 41 or 42% of the vote. Everything changed in that 6-week period up until the runoff. And Brian ended up winning and beating Casey Cagle. A lot can change and a lot can happen in that time period between the primary and then the runoff. And in the state of Georgia, a candidate has to have 50% plus one vote. So if you have 18 candidates running for any seat whatsoever, the top 2 candidates are the ones that advance to the runoff if no one has 50% plus one. That's why it's so critical for the governor to get that 50% plus one, because then he can outright claim that he is the nominee. It will galvanize the party, and hopefully there'll be some unity. But if 6 months goes by and there's more divisiveness and more division within the Republican Party, it makes it a lot more difficult to kumbaya at the end when you're done. And it also gives Stacey Abrams a lot more ammunition, because now you've got your fellow party candidate that is attacking you. And that's just fodder for Stacey to use when she starts spending millions of dollars from Hollywood money in September and October of this year, which is exactly what she'll do.
And since you mentioned her, let's just, I know you're on the Republican side of things, but you're in Georgia. She has basically been running for governor since the last time she ran for governor. It's no big secret, but she's also put a ton of work in. She's built up networks. We know about the Bloomberg money that she's been working off through her organizations. She, on paper, looks like she's much more formidable this way. And this was a razor close race last time. How does it feel for you looking just as a candidate stacking up? Does it feel like she's going to be stronger this time? We know there's the specter of Trump. He's not going to be real happy. He's probably not going to be supporting Governor Kemp. There's a lot of moving pieces here, but one of those moving pieces is, do you think Stacey Abrams is a stronger candidate this time than last time?
No, I don't think so. I think she will have more outside money. I think she will have more of a national group supporting her, but people in Hollywood, people in DC, Terry McAuliffe doesn't vote in Georgia, and he just held a fundraiser for her last week. It was all over Twitter. That's not who votes. And if you get out in Georgia, yeah, there are some groups, some people in certain parts of the state that are very strong Stacey Abrams supporters. They will vote for her no matter what. And then you get in other parts of the state, and they will never vote for Stacey Abrams. And so the fear tactic that Perdue and Trump have tried to use is, hey, you know what? Either vote for David Perdue, because we're not going to vote for Brian Kemp. We'll stay home. I can promise you this. Those voters, when November rolls around, they may not want to vote for Brian Kemp, but they sure will not vote for Stacey Abrams. And so much so that they will not want Stacey Abrams in office. They will vote for Brian Kemp. So I honestly think that the governor will get reelected by a larger margin than what he did in 2018. I know that's a bold statement. I think Stacey's got a lot more money this time, but I think she may saturate and wear people out.
To be fair, he can't do it by much more of a narrow margin, because there wasn't much more of a narrow margin to do it. So that might be a low bar to clear, my friend. Just going to call you out on that a little bit. Talking to our buddy Jason Downey down in Georgia. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to expand out a little bit. He is on the Georgia State Board of Education. We're going to talk about education. He just did a town hall was out doing his kind of due diligence in the community. We'll talk about that, how he managed to not go viral, unlike some other folks doing these education meetings as of late. More perspective on Georgia from somebody that's actually in Georgia. We'll continue with Jason Downey on Heard Tell right after this. Welcome back to Heard Tell, talking to our friend down in Georgia, Jason Downey. He's an attorney. He's also on the Georgia State Board of Education. Let's talk about that. You were just out in the public. You were doing some of your due diligence as part of your duties. We've seen so many town halls and so many Board of Education meetings devolve online. Now, of course, those are the ones that make, the hundreds and the thousands of them that go smoothly never get online, but we've seen plenty of them. When you go out in the community, what are you trying to do to avoid that? Because I'm sure you've got people that are hot. I'm sure you got people that are very passionate. I'm sure you probably got some troublemakers out there as well, especially when the big guy in the state's showing up in a smaller venue. What's your approach to those sort of things so that it is productive and you still do, people get their fair shot at an appointee like you? That's fair. How do you approach these things, and how did it go now that you got those people, even though it's an election year and passions are probably up a little bit?
One thing I have found, people want you to listen to what they have to say. And I think where some school boards in other states, and to be fair, some in Georgia, where they fall short, the local school boards in particular, they don't listen. They won't listen to what parents and stakeholders have to say. That's why it's so important to get out and have these town hall meetings. We're required, State Board of Education members, to have one meeting per year, a minimum of one meeting per year, a town hall, which is a listening session, which is created so that people can come and voice their concerns about anything and everything related to public education. We're required to have them in our congressional district. I represent the 8th congressional district on the State Board of Education. So I did one last year. I did another one this year. And I get stopped all the time by people at the Publix, at the Kroger, wherever, at Ingles, and they want to talk about education issues. I think the biggest thing you have to do as an elected or an appointed official is let people talk, let people tell you what they think, what they want to see done, and then offer to work with them. Say, well, what can you do? What can we do together to make things better? What can I take back to Atlanta? What can I take to the state legislators, who are the ones that write the laws that impact public education? Who do you want me to talk to? And that has been very receptive. I think the problem we get into, these town hall meetings that you see where people are cut off and they're not allowed to talk, that's where you get into problems, where you tell people, we don't care what you have to say, we're the deciders, and leave us alone. That's been the problem. And so that I've just always had a policy: if you've got something you want to tell me, I'm going to listen. I'm going to ask you how we can change it and what you're going to do to work with me to make it happen.
One thing that came out of that too, and this isn't originally me, this was a local official I was interviewing for the radio a couple of years ago when this was really kind of starting to get ugly with some of the issues going on. But he pointed this out, and I thought it was a good point to make. He's like, over and over again, these people are showing up to the school board meeting, goes, well, nobody here believes what I believe. And then I always say, well, yeah, but this is also the first time you're here. Those two things go together. These things are participatory. Do we treat these things too much like they just happen in a vacuum? Like, pick whatever hot button you want to, COVID had people upset, CRT had people upset, but they show up for that one issue and then they disappear. That's not how Board of Educations work when it's functional, because you need to have cohesion and you need to have some continuity to these things, and not just have them pop up in a vacuum when there's some major issue that make people excited enough to go to a meeting, right?
Well, and that is true. You do have some people that stay engaged throughout the year, that they have issues related to policy that matter to them, and they're going to show up at every Board of Education meeting. They're going to voice their opinions, and we respect that. But all the same, if there is something that is so intense that someone feels compelled to show up at a Board of Education meeting, even if it's just one issue and they've never been there before, we have to treat everyone equally. We have to listen to their concerns. Now, there's a difference between a concern and just absolutely going off and raising holy grief. We can't just let people go and obstruct and try to change the way things are done. I mean, if you want to come and have sensible conversation with us, to have sensible ideas and propose solutions, or work with us for solutions on whatever it is that bothers you, we're going to work together with you on that. Even if it's the first time you've shown up for a meeting or the 55th time, But the problem, you're right. I think what's happened is these school boards are not equipped to know how to deal with the person that comes the one time, because they're used to the person that comes every single meeting, and they might have 20 people at a meeting. And now suddenly you've got 200 people that show up, and you're calling the fire marshal because there's too many people in the room, and there's a line, and everyone wants to talk, and they get mad when you cut them off. And I think that's the problem, is school boards need to understand, local school boards, because in the state of Georgia, the local school boards are actually elected by the local area that they live in. They need to understand that they are accountable to their voters. They are accountable to the people who put them in office, and they need to listen to their concerns. Now, that doesn't mean kowtow, but you got to work with them.
Yeah, let's talk about something else that's been getting some press in Georgia as far as people trying to govern themselves, sometimes not in a great way. Explain the Buckhead City thing to folks that are not in Georgia. I've read on it because I follow it. Trump's been making an issue of this. David Perdue even mentioned it because let's just be grown folk here. The money people that back him up is the same people that are behind those sorts of things. But explain that, because it sounds like such a weird issue to the outside national audience. Like, what in the world are they talking about Buckhead City? This is a big deal in Georgia, especially in Atlanta, especially in certain communities. This is a really touchy subject. Try to explain that for folks that aren't familiar with the Buckhead City and what that's about.
You have several moving parts, and part of it, to understand the history of counties in the state of Georgia, we have a lot of counties here, a lot of counties, over 150. And some of the counties are shaped oddly. And part of that is because during the Depression and in other times, but mainly during the Depression, there were some counties that were bankrupt or not doing well, and counties merged. So when you look at the map and you look at Fulton County, which is where Atlanta is, it is very oddly shaped. It's got a wide part at the bottom, and then it gets real narrow, and then it gets big at the top. That top part used to be its own county called Milton County. And so there's always been this division between Fulton, North Fulton, and South Fulton, or the Milton part, if you will, of Fulton County. And it's always sort of been, getting into racial undertones here, that sort of the white flight of Fulton County has been in the more northern part, up in what was Milton, okay? And so that's where Buckhead is, and it's part of Atlanta. Buckhead is heading up toward that North Fulton part of the county. It's still part of the city of Atlanta, but we have neighborhoods in Atlanta, and Buckhead is a very strong commercial district where there are a lot of hotels, a lot of law offices. There are some higher end houses that are there as well. So there was a movement that happened and began happening by, honestly, some outsiders, some people who aren't even from the area. Down here in the South, we call them carpetbaggers, but they kind of have rolled into Buckhead area and said, hey, we want to separate from the city of Atlanta. We have a tax base up here, and we can sustain ourselves. We want to have our own police force. We want to have our own tax allocation districts. We want to be our own city. And so that's been the movement there. But there are a lot of other moving parts, because what would that do to the city of Atlanta? How would that cripple their tax base? And Atlanta also has its own school system, Atlanta Public Schools. Well, they service Buckhead. So what happens there? Would there be some sort of an agreement where Atlanta Public Schools would service the city of Buckhead, or would Buckhead City then have to open up its own education district? A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, it sounds like a hot mess. Our friend Jason Downey joining us real quick while we still got you for a few minutes here. We know the midterm election going forward. What's the state of Georgia? Are we still calling it a purple state? Do you feel like, because we know the 2 Senate seats flipped, but there was also some special circumstances of that. We know the Republicans are going to do well in the midterm, regardless of how the state house in Georgia goes and what's probably going to be a close race. How does it feel? Because Georgia, Atlanta keeps growing. Georgia is diversifying, but then you also have these really, really red districts, like we've seen with like the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world, where they, apparently will elect anybody. Just as somebody that's lived there for a while, somebody that loves the place, give the state of play to the outside observers, because this seems like this is going to be a battleground area for a long, long term to come, because a lot of national type issues are kind of microcosmed in Georgia, not just in Atlanta, but the state of Georgia itself too.
Well, I think what happened in the most recent elections is you had a lot of newer voters you do have an influx of population. I mean, Georgia, I believe, is the 8th largest state now in population. We have like with North Carolina, we're right there neck and neck with North Carolina. The difference between Georgia and other states like us is that we've got about 7 million people that live in the metro area of Atlanta. And the politics have really been as such that new voters tend to trend toward the Democrat Party. And so what has happened is you are seeing, and you did see in 2020, what is born out of that. I mean, Stacey Abrams, you mentioned, she put in a lot of work. She really got a lot of new voters out there and excited. What I wonder, and there's no way to really tell because you never really know how a party is going to react to certain issues down the road. If I had to say, is it going to stay a battleground state for a while? Yes. Now, in 10 years, what's that going to mean? I don't know, because I don't know what the issues are going to necessarily be that impact those new voters. Right now, they're brand new. They tend to be minority voters. They tend to trend with the Democratic Party, and that's why they voted the way they did. Will they continue to do that in 10 years? I really don't know.
Yeah, Jason Downey, our friend down there. Okay, 2 quick questions for you to round this up. Talking a little Georgia. You're a Georgia guy. You're a Marshall guy. Can I get an unbiased opinion on JT Daniels?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When I saw all of the schools he was looking at, and then he was going to WVU, I remember I said, well, not that I didn't like WVU to begin with, being a Marshall guy. I'm just going to be honest. But if he goes up there, now I can get my Georgia friends to really hate on WVU even more. Not, he is a great quarterback. I think he's going to be a great fit for the offense that Neil's got up there. I hope he does well. Kirby Smart, the issue is when you've got a coach like that and he's just an unbelievable recruiter, you can't recruit 15,000 quarterbacks that are 5-star. Eventually, one of them's going to go somewhere else. So I wish JT all the best. I'd like for him to throw for 500 yards every game, and then the defense give up a bunch of points and WVU lose every game. But that's just me.
Yeah, it's not so much anymore, but for those that are unfamiliar, WVU is the state school and Marshall is those Valley kids that are all uppity and privileged and what such. That's not really true so much anymore, but it is the private school and that's kind of the running joke here. So,
right.
And you're one of those Thundering Herd grads, so defend your school, please.
I am. Yeah, I'm proud to be a Thundering Herd Marshall grad, and I graduated from there in 2000. I loved spending time in Huntington. I come back to West Virginia about once a year, and it's always interesting to see all the WVU stuff and then all the Marshall stuff. And of course, grew up right outside of Charleston, so I don't want to say it's divided. It's definitely probably more 65% WVU. And I understand that it's the flagship school, flagship university, and the larger school. So I don't begrudge that. It is what it is. I gave up on that a long time ago.
Don't look at me, man. We all went to Glenville. Jason Downey, women's basketball national champions. Thank you very much for Division 1A. No, yeah, it's not 1A anymore. It's Division 2 now.
I saw that. That's exciting for them. That's it's exciting.
Deal.
We've had 2 national championships that have come out of the state now, with Marshall winning in soccer. I had to throw that in. But it's exciting when you can bring good attention to the state through college athletics, and especially when it's the smaller programs that people kind of sleep on. That's exciting for Glenville.
And you're going to get to see a lot more, Marshall, because they changed conferences. They're going to be down south a whole bunch now, including Coastal Carolina, close to where my Carolina house is. I got connections with Coastal Carolina. I'll get to go watch probably a game or 2 down there. All right, one more for you, sports related, since we were talking politics. What are we going to do about our poor beloved Reds? Because it's bad.
I have no idea. I wish we could do a GoFundMe and try to buy the team from Castellini. We could pay him in Skyline chili or Grater's ice cream. I really don't know. It pains me. I have been a Reds fan. There's a picture of me as a baby with a Reds jersey on. I mean, I've rooted for the Reds all my life, but it's tough. It is really tough to support what Castellini's doing with that team and what they're doing. I mean, they had 10,000 at last night's game. That's sad. I mean, the Braves here now, granted, they just won the World Series, but on a Tuesday night game, they're going to draw 30,000 people. And you can't sustain having a team in Cincinnati with only 10,000. But I think Castellini wants to send the team to Nashville anyway. So I don't know. But it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, the MLS team should not be outdrawing the Cincinnati Reds. And I love MLS. That's not a knock on them at all. I'm just saying that's how things have changed. When you're selling out Nyford Stadium for an MLS game and you can't get people in the ballpark for a Reds game, there's problems. I don't know, man. I mean, I'm old enough to remember the Marge shot years and the disaster piece that was for years and years and years. But we're kind of getting, not with all the things that she said, the racial stuff, obviously, but as far as mismanagement of the team, we're kind of starting to get into that territory a little bit, and I don't like it one little bit. Jason Downey, let's do this more often, buddy.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Love talking to you until we get you back on the show again, because Georgia's going to be, that's one of the races to watch. So we'll definitely have you on here again soon as the race develops, especially after we get the primaries out of the way. Let folks know where they can follow you and what you got going on until they see you on Hertel again.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, Jason E. Downey, BOE. Andrew and I follow each other. So we retweet each other a time or two. You can follow me there. I've also got a couple of Facebook accounts, Jason E. Downey. And, follow me. You'll see all kinds of crazy stuff about the Reds, anti-WVU stuff, and maybe a little politics here and there.
He's one of these bourbon snobs too, so watch for him for the Twitter Supper Club hashtag. I'm sure he'll start putting a drink or two on there with some opinions thereof as well, my friend. Jason Downey, thanks so much for the time today, sir. Talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Take care.
Appreciate it, sir.